Order! Calm yourself, man! The lion must get back in its den! Order!
Hello, and welcome to what I hope may be the first of many reviews of Prime Minister's questions. Now, if you're from outside the UK or you don't know what Prime Minister's questions is, so basically every week in Parliament, MPs gather round with their questions for the Prime Minister. In theory, to ask him, this is what's happening, what are you doing about it? Now, in practice, the Prime Minister very rarely actually answers the questions. And actually, it's more like a posh yo mama fight with all the MPs jeering behind the two main political leaders with these ridiculous, over-the-top theatrical gestures. So the main part people tune in to see is the questions from the leader of the opposition. So at the moment, there's currently Keir Starmer, and he will be asking his questions to Rishi Sunak. But as well as that, there are two questions from Stephen Flynn, who is the leader of the SNP. And so I'm just going to cover those questions. I'm not going to deal with all of it because, these things can go on for an hour or more. So let's start with Keir Starmer's first question.
Leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in sending His Majesty the King our very best wishes for his treatment. Across this House, we all look forward to seeing him back to full health as quickly as possible.
If you weren't aware, King Charles has recently been diagnosed with cancer.
Mr. Speaker, this week the unwavering bravery of Brianna Jay's mother, Esther, has touched us all. As a father, I can't even imagine the pain that she's going through, and I'm glad that she's with us in the gallery here today.
Pay particular attention to what Keir Starmer just said there.
Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Prime Minister promised to bring NHS waiting lists down. Isn't he glad he didn't bet £1,000 on it?
Mr. Speaker.
So what Starmer was referring to there was an interview Rishi Sunak gave with Piers Morgan when they were talking about Rishi Sunak's Rwanda policy, and Piers Morgan made a bet of £1,000 that Sunak wouldn't be able to get that policy off the ground. It doesn't make for a good look for the Prime Minister. And the thing with the whole Rwanda thing is it's just a gimmick policy anyway. It's not going to make much of an impact on migration numbers anyway. But anyway, let's see what he says about NHS waiting lists.
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, at least I stand by my commitments. He's so indecisive, the only bet he'd make is an each-way bet.
So Sunak actually said nothing there about the NHS, which was what Keir Starmer's question was. So get used to that. The Prime Minister very rarely actually answers the question.
Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he says he stands by his commitments. He once insisted that if he missed his promises, these are the words he used, "I'm the Prime Minister," and then he said, "It's on me personally." Today we learned from his own officials that he's the blocker to any deal to end the doctor strikes. Yep. And he's always, every time he's asked, he blames everyone else. So what exactly did he mean when he said it's on him personally if he doesn't meet his promise?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, we are bringing the waiting list down for the longest waiters. We're making progress, but it's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker.
A question late there, but then Sunak does answer.
To hear about promises from someone who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, I think I counted almost 30 in the last year. Pensions, planning, peerages, public sector pay, tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman. Although in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn. The list goes on, but the theme is the same, Mr. Speaker. It's empty words, broken promises, and absolutely no plan.
So, once again, Sunak did not answer the question. And pay a particular attention, he just said about Starmer's inability to define a woman. And remember what Keir Starmer said right before he asked his first question.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame, parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility.
So, if you don't know, Brianna Gay is a trans teenager from Liverpool who was murdered. And she was murdered by two teenage killers, and the verdict was only reached just within the last week. So now was really not the right time, especially not with her mother in the public gallery, for Sunak to be making any sort of transphobic attacks.
Absolute. Of all.
Either side.
That's probably one of the rare occasions you'll actually see Keir Starmer lose his cool.
I think the member's getting carried away. Can I just say that our constituents want to hear the questions and they certainly want to hear the answers. They don't want to hear organised barracking. So please, I want no more. Keir Starmer.
So also just to clarify here, the person just speaking was Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House. So basically, his job is to control the conversation in Parliament, and there are certain rules and protocols that have to be followed. Such as one thing, for example, is you can't use names in Parliament. So whenever Starmer wants to speak to Sunak, he must address him as the Prime Minister. And in turn, if Sunak wants to speak to Starmer, he must refer to him as the Leader of the Opposition.
I think the role of the Prime Minister is to ensure that every single citizen in this country feels safe and respected. It's a shame the Prime Minister doesn't share that. I welcome the fact that he's finally admitted that he's failed on waiting lists in the NHS. I also welcome that he's finally acknowledged the crisis in NHS dentistry. He's calling it a recovery plan after 14 years of Tory government. What exactly does he think the NHS dentistry is recovering from? Prime Minister.
So in the UK this week, there have been images of massive queues of people just waiting to get in to see one of these NHS dentists.
As ever, Mr. Speaker, he seems to convene.
Certainly not having enough of the front bench either. Please, I want to hear it. The election fever, I'm hoping, is not coming tomorrow, so let's not behave as though it is. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as ever, he conveniently forgets the impact of a pandemic on NHS dentistry, and it was specifically because of the close proximity nature of dental provision that it was unable to operate as normal throughout the pandemic. That was the recommendation of the medical and clinical experts, Mr. Speaker, which is why inevitably there is a backlog in dental care and the impact that it has. But that's why
So the pandemic has become a catch-all excuse for Conservatives. But actually, if you look at the facts, you will see all these waiting lists were going up long before the pandemic hit. Now, you can say the pandemic exacerbated the problem, but to say it was the cause is just simply wrong.
as my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will outline later today for the House, we're putting more funding in to provide more NHS provision across the country, on top of plans that will see the number of dental training places increase by 40%, Mr. Speaker. But I would actually just point out, our plans mean that there will be 2.5 million more NHS appointments.
I think he's referring to Gillian Keegan's crazy plan to take on apprentice dentists, which is just insane.
Which is, in fact, 3 times more than the Labour Party are proposing.
Mr. Speaker, there are some areas in the country where you literally can't have an NHS dentist, and he says that's down to COVID. People are literally pulling out their own teeth.
Sorry. Can I just say, I don't need any more off this front bench either. Do we understand each other? Carry on, please, stop.
Speaker, people are literally pulling their teeth out using pliers. It's an experience that can be compared with extracting an answer from the Prime Minister at this dispatch box. The truth is, after 14
That was a pretty good line from Starmer there.
years of neglect, this recovery plan is just a desperate attempt to try to recover back to square one. If he wanted to move forward, he should follow Labour. Scrap the non-dollar.
Square one is a line the Conservatives have been using a lot in recent weeks, trying to imply that if we vote for a Labour government, it will take us backwards. Although the alternative, actually, maybe square one isn't that bad at all.
Tax status, use the money to fund 2 million more hospital appointments every year. But, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is oddly reluctant to follow us on this. What exactly is so special about this tax avoidance scheme that the Prime Minister prioritises it above the NHS?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's look at that record. We've, in the NHS, record funding, record doctors and nurses, record number of appointments, higher cancer survival rates. But what's happening under Labour's watch in Wales, Mr. Speaker? Let's have.
Okay, so this is a common tactic that Conservatives like to use. They like to, whenever they're in trouble, because obviously NHS waiting lists have grown dramatically in England over the last 14 years, the time that the Conservatives have been in government. So what they like to do is shift the burden onto Wales, which is ostensibly run by Labour, but it's a little more complicated than that, because a lot of the funding that the devolved Welsh government receives is dictated by Westminster.
A fifth of people in Wales are currently on a waiting list. Waits of 18 months or more are 10 times higher than that in England, and people are waiting twice as long for an operation. Their failure has sent the Welsh NHS back to square one, and will never let them do that here.
Mr. Speaker, when he admitted that he'd failed on waiting lists, I actually thought that we might be entering a new era of integrity, professionalism and accountability. Remember that one?
That was a line Sunak used when he first became Prime Minister.
But just like all the other relaunches, it's proved to be a false dawn, still blaming everyone else, still removed from reality. It's very simple. You can either back more NHS appointments or more tax avoidance. We know what side we're on. Why doesn't he?
Mr. Speaker, the best way to ensure that we continue to fund.
So you might wonder, why is Starmer pushing on this line? Well, Sunak's wife actually holds non-dom status, which means she doesn't have to pay tax on her income in the United Kingdom.
On the NHS, as we have, is not to make £28 billion of unfunded spending commitments. And just this morning, independent Treasury.
So the 28 billion that Sunak just referred to, this is something the Conservatives like to use a lot. It was a spending plan that Labour did have, but it was based on growth projections, but they were before Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss's disastrous budget. And as such, Labour has since tied itself up in knots over whether they still want to go ahead with this.
Officials have published a formal costing of just one part of their eco-promise, their insulation scheme, and it turns out that it will cost.
Also, notice how Sunak is not answering the question. He is trying to turn it back on Keir Starmer.
Double what they had previously claimed. Not the £6 billion that Labour accounted for, but £13 billion every single year. It's now crystal clear they have absolutely no plan, but we all know how they're going to fund that gap. More taxes on hard-working people. Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is Mr. 25 tax rises.
Yeah, it's rich for Rishi Sunak to accuse anyone of wanting to raise taxes when it's under his chancellorship and now him as Prime Minister that the United Kingdom is seeing its highest tax burden since the end of the Second World War.
He's literally the country's expert on putting taxes up, and he thinks he can lecture everyone else on the economy. Last week, he and his MPs were laughing at someone whose mortgage had gone up £1,000 a month. This week, he's casually made a £1,000 bet in the middle of an interview.
Yeah, so that was another bad failing on Sunak's part at the last PMQs, where Keir Starmer had told him of a worker in an Iceland store in Liverpool who had seen his mortgage go up by £1,000. And he was greeted by jeers from the Conservative front bench, which I genuinely think Starmer was quite taken aback by. So weirdly, that's 2 weeks in a row that Sunak has actually managed to throw Starmer off his game, but not for the right reasons.
Last week, he thought even raising questions about the cost of living was, and I quote, resorting to the politics of envy. And this week, he's finally found the cause that he wants to rally around, the non-dom status. When he finds himself backing tax avoidance over NHS appointments, does he start to understand why his own MPs are saying he simply does not get what Britain needs?
Prime Minister.
So it was just yesterday that there was a meeting of a brand new Conservative group who were called Popular Conservatives. Honestly, that's like maybe the 13th different Conservative group now.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lectures about getting about getting Britain from a man who thought it was right to defend terrorists, Mr. Speaker. But
What Sunak is doing there is misrepresenting the legal profession. So it is true, as Keir Starmer used to be the Director of Public Prosecutions, and as a barrister, part of his job was defending people in court. And unfortunately, the thing with that is the people you defend are not always good people. So, yeah, it is true that he did defend terrorists and murderers because that's what the job of a barrister is. You know, they operate by what's called the cap rank rule, where basically if you are asked to give your service, then that's what you do. It's an important part of the legal process that everyone gets a right to fair representation. Now, Sunak knows this, of course. He's been corrected on this many times, but he's still going to repeat the line.
what we're doing is building a brighter future for our country. In just the last week, expanding healthcare in pharmacies. Today, expanding dental care. This week, helping millions with the cost of living. And most importantly, cutting national insurance. All while the Labour Party argue over 28 billion different ways to raise people's taxes. That's the difference between us. We're delivering a plan. They can't even agree on one.
My constituents are now.
So, I think Sunak, I think that was quite a low energy performance from him, to be honest. Starmer didn't do great there. There was no killer question, but Sunak, he just comes across as a beaten man. Now, obviously, the main talking point that's come out of this is Brianna Gay's mother, who was watching this from the public gallery. And like I said, it's not often you'll see Keir Starmer lose his cool. But yeah, it's something that Sunak uses a lot. Every other week, he likes to use the line that Starmer doesn't know what a woman is. And now you see the thing with the whole trans debate is somewhat more complex than that. And that's what he's not acknowledging. But yeah, this was not a good look for Sunak to be doing that while her mother was in the gallery watching this. And they've made it worse since. They've doubled down on it rather than just admit, you know, we shouldn't have said that. You know, but yeah, all right. Well, anyway, next question is just a fluffball question. You always get right after the leader of the oppositions.
I send our best wishes to the King and royal family. Mr. Speaker, despite the popular narrative, our economy is doing well with an unemployment rate well below the EU average, strong inward investment and record employment.
Yeah, you see, this question is always designed just to boost the Prime Minister.
Taxes are higher than Conservatives would like, but does my right honourable friend agree that a key reason for this is that we rightly spent $400 billion on COVID support, including one of the most generous furlough schemes, in order to ensure that no one got left behind, and that it is our intention and instinct to lower taxes, unlike the parties opposite.
So that question possibly couldn't have been any more fawning of Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to highlight our record of providing support to the country when it needed it, whether it's the NHS, vaccines or furlough during COVID, or most recently help with people's energy bills. We're only able to afford that because of the strong management of our economy, which is why we must stick with the plan, not risk going back to square one with the Labour Party, who, as we know, have absolutely no plan and will cost everyone in this country with their £28 billion worth of tax rises.
Leader of the SNP.
I don't know, square one sounds pretty good to me.
Stephen Flynn.
So, thank you.
So, just to clarify, Stephen Flynn, he's the leader of the Scottish National Party in Parliament. Now, he's very much to the left. So, though he is definitely no friend of Rishi Sunak's, he is no friend of Keir Starmer's either.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I begin by expressing my heartfelt sympathies to Brianna's mother, who is in the public gallery as we speak, and also to send my best wishes to King Charles in what will hopefully be a quick and full recovery. Mr. Speaker, the public are used to the Tories gambling on the lives of others. Boris Johnson, he did it with public health during the pandemic. His immediate successor, she did it with household finances. So not to be outdone, the Prime Minister on Monday this week accepted a crude bet regarding the lives of asylum seekers. In doing so, he demeaned them as individuals and
So Stephen Flynn is going full in on Sunak's £1,000 bet with Piers Morgan.
he degraded the office that he currently holds. So can I ask him, will he apologise?
Mr. Speaker, we may have a principal disagreement on this. I believe, and we believe, that if someone comes to this country illegally, they shouldn't be able to stay, they should be removed, and that's why we're committed to our Rwanda scheme.
Stephen Flynn.
So illegal is a word that these politicians often like to hide behind. It's all very well saying, oh, they came here illegally. But the fact remains, there is no legal route for them to use. And actually, Rwanda isn't going to help much anyway, because they will only take 100 or so a year, and the agreement is reciprocal. So we might even end up taking more than we send out.
Mr. Speaker, as ever, the Prime Minister does himself no favours, because, of course, the bet to which we are referring was worth £1,000, and it came just hours before the Prime Minister ended cost of living support worth just £900. And his justification for doing so was that the cost of living crisis is easing. So can I ask him, what does he believe leaves him looking most out of touch with the public? Gambling £1,000 or believing that the cost of living crisis is getting better?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talked.
So this is something that was referred to last week. So a lot of support has been cut for the poorest people, and yeah, there's not really much way to justify that.
Talks about the cost of living. Perhaps he can explain to the Scottish people why it is that whilst the UK Conservative government is cutting their taxes, the Scottish government is raising them.
So there we go. We finished with a total non-answer from Sunak there. He did not address why he's cutting off support to the most vulnerable, and just used it as an attack on the SNP. So yeah, that's the end of this week's PMQs. So I've tried to make it as informative as possible, and try to explain what's going on if you've never seen it before, and if you're not familiar with the parliamentary conventions. So I hope to be doing this again regularly. If you enjoyed it, let me know. Please feel free to like and subscribe. Help an angel get its wings by hitting the notification bell. And if there's someone you don't like, maybe you could share this video with them. Thank you. I'll see you on the next one.
Order!